Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here this morning. Joining me are Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford, Maryland Budget Secretary David Brinkley, Deputy Budget Secretary Mark Nicole, and my senior advisor and budget guru, former Senator Bobby Neal. Is that a good title, guru?
I love it.
This morning, I hosted a great breakfast with the Speaker, the President of the Senate, all of the legislative leaders over at Government House for a fiscal summit meeting to preview the FY 2018 budget, which is to be submitted tomorrow. We very much look forward to working with the legislature so that we can continue to make progress on behalf of the people of Maryland. The budget that we are announcing decreases general fund spending in real dollars. It doesn't just slow the rate of growth, but we actually spend less than last year's budget, while still funding our priorities, including record funding in K through 12 education for the third year in a row. We are able to accomplish this with no new taxes and no cuts to services, and without raiding dedicated special funds. And once again, this budget is 100% structurally balanced. A little less than 2 years ago, when I was sworn in as governor, our state faced a $5.1 billion structural deficit. The day after I was sworn in, we submitted the first structurally balanced budget in a decade. We did this without eliminating agencies, departments, or services, without layoffs or furloughs, and while providing record funding for education. Our first budget eliminated almost 90% of the $5.1 billion structural deficit which we inherited. With our second budget, we continued to stress fiscal restraint. We worked together with members of the legislature to pass our budget in both houses several weeks early with very little disagreement or debate. Once again, we were able to increase and fully fund education and other priorities. Last year, we were also able to reach $1 billion in the rainy day fund and preserve an additional $440 million cash surplus. We held firm and we refused to spend the additional $80 million in, quote, fenced-off money, which the legislature attempted to force us to spend. We knew that cleaning up the financial mess which we inherited would continue to require a difficult, continued, multi-year effort. Because of the fiscal restraint we've instituted over the past 2 years, while many other states are facing crippling budget shortfalls, we are in much, much better shape today than we would have been. We have repeatedly cautioned against the unsustainable forced spending increases that account for 83% of the state's own source revenues and which have put our budget on autopilot for even more massive spending increases that we simply can't afford. Nice chart here displays that. Can't afford in times when the revenues are not there. Currently, 83 cents out of every tax dollar is mandated spending, leaving us only 17 cents to do all of our budget balancing, belt tightening, and reining in of spending. Every Marylander understands that if you are consistently forced to spend more than you take in year after year, that eventually you will have a serious problem. Our administration is once again introducing legislation to control these forced spending increases which exceed revenues. Last year, not only did the legislature ignore our warnings on the need for mandate relief, they instead actually proposed a whopping $4.4 billion in new forced spending increases in just 90 days. Now, luckily, we were able to stop most of that. But in spite of our best efforts, they were able to force another $519 million in new mandated spending increases. These new mandated spending increases, combined with revenues which were not as high as projected, mean that our state is now already, once again, back in a position where state spending outpaces our revenue growth. Even the legislature's own top financial analyst warned them recently that now is the time for the legislature to, quote, get real about not spending more than we take in. We are hopeful that this year members of the legislature will finally put aside the tax and spend politics and instead work together with us in a bipartisan way to enact meaningful, common sense budget reforms. Today, we are announcing the Common Sense Spending Act of 2017, which will ensure that future budgets continue to prioritize key expenditures like education and healthcare, while giving leaders the flexibility to make tough decisions to trim excessive cost increases that exceed revenues. This bill puts into practice the most basic common sense that you simply can't spend money that you don't have. We are also introducing the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2017. For many years, state revenues have been volatile and unpredictable. They can easily be up one year and down the next based on any number of things like changes in the national economy or the stock market. To be better prepared, we should save the excess revenue in strong economic times in order to prepare for those times when more flexibility is needed. The Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2017 will end the practice of using occasional temporary revenue spikes to fund known recurring future expenses. With this legislation, in a good year with a revenue surplus, that excess income will automatically be moved into the state's rainy day fund in order to save that extra revenue and have it available to use for years when revenues fall short. We look forward to working with legislators on both sides of the aisle to enact these common sense, bipartisan budget reforms. Now, our fiscal 2018 budget, which we discussed with legislative leaders earlier this morning, reduces general fund spending in real dollars to less than what was spent last year. Our budget, as I said, is again 100% structurally balanced. For the third year in a row, we provide increases in education spending. We put a record $6.4 billion into K through 12 education, fully funding the mandates. This covers 100% of the education spending increases based on the formulas set by the legislature. So let me be clear. This is record funding for education, and every single penny that every single jurisdiction anticipates from the state for education will be fully funded at 100%. In addition, we will be adding $334 million more in school construction funding. We are also including additional investments for 6 more P-TECH schools. For higher education, we are providing $1.35 billion for the University System of Maryland, which also represents an increase over last year. And community colleges are fully funded in our budget. We are providing $256.1 million for community colleges, which is above the funding formula and is also a record, the most ever invested in our community colleges. And as we announced last week, we will be providing an additional $17.5 million to specifically provide for tuition relief so that 14 Maryland colleges and universities can now cap tuition growth at only 2% rather than the 5% that they were proposing. A little more than 2/3 of our entire capital budget goes towards education. Our fiscal 2018 budget also maintains important social safety net services for Marylanders and provides increases for the vast majority of those service providers. To continue to add jobs, grow our economy, and educate our workforce, our budget includes record funding, almost $24 million for the Maryland Economic Development Assistance Authority and Fund, MEDAF, $9 million in additional funding for advanced venture entrepreneurship and technology transfer programs in higher education, and we are doubling the funding for the EARN Employment Advancement Right Now, which is a nationally recognized program we started here for job training and workforce development. We will invest an additional $4 million in substance abuse funding. In addition, for the second year in a row, we are investing more for addiction treatment, including an increase in treatment beds of 50% over the previous administration. To continue to safeguard Maryland's environment for the next generation, our budget dedicates $51 million more for the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund. When it comes to public safety, we are investing $7 million more to bolster entry procedure and contraband efforts at our correctional facilities. We're adding another $7 million to continue the Maryland State Police Vehicle Replacement Program, and $1.9 million additional dollars to add more law enforcement officers with the Natural Resources Police. Our capital budget includes critical funding to revitalize our cities. We will invest another more than $22 million for Project CORE to continue our blight removal program in Baltimore City, and an additional $14 million for economic development, tourism, and arts projects in cities, including places like Cumberland, Hagerstown, and Salisbury. In addition, our budget includes targeted tax relief to help Marylanders that deserve it the most, including law enforcement officers, fire, rescue, and emergency services personnel, as well as tax relief for military retirees. And as we announced last week, much needed relief from student loan debt. In addition to reining in spending, we are also reining in how much the state borrows. Just as we did last year, we are holding the capital debt limit line at $995 million in fiscal year 2018. Debt payments from the operating budget continue to skyrocket, and our annual debt service payments are the fastest growing line item in the budget. Basically, after years of running up the credit cards, the result is devastating. Next year, the state will be forced to spend more on debt service payments than we will be able to spend on school construction, which is completely unacceptable. With the action our administration has taken over the last 2 years, and those that we are taking this year, it will save nearly $700 million in debt service payments, but we continue to need to do more. An overwhelming majority of Marylanders support our efforts at fiscal restraint and our hard work to hold the line on unsustainable spending. Obviously, our colleagues in the legislature will not agree on everything in this budget, and they will have the next 84 days to discuss it and review it and make changes to it. But Maryland's budget is simply too important to just play politics with. It is clear that we must come together, roll up our sleeves, and have a rational and honest discussion about reining in uncontrollable spending and debt in Annapolis. And finally, learning to live within our means. Thank you, and at this time.